The fluorescent lights of Naval Base Coronado's main administrative building hummed with the steady persistence of government efficiency. Commander Sarah Mitchell walked through the corridors at 0630 hours, her civilian clothes, dark jeans, and a simple navy polo drawing no attention from the early morning personnel moving through their routines. Her light brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her only accessories were a worn leather watch and small silver earrings that caught the harsh lighting. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 34, Sarah had the kind of unremarkable appearance that served her profession well. Average height, athletic but not obviously so, with green eyes that most people described as friendly rather than penetrating. She carried a standard military-issue laptop bag and a coffee cup from the base exchange, looking for all the world like another staff officer reporting for routine duty. The security checkpoint at the building's entrance processed her credentials with mechanical efficiency. Her military ID listed her as Commander S. Mitchell, Intelligence Analysis Division, cleared for secret materials. Nothing unusual there. Hundreds of similar personnel moved through Coronado daily, processing the endless flow of information that kept America's naval operations functioning. "Morning, ma'am," the young petty officer manning the checkpoint said, handing back her ID without really looking at her face. His attention was already shifting to the next person in line, a captain whose chest candy and bearing marked him as someone important enough to warrant actual notice. Sarah nodded her thanks and moved into the building's main corridor, her soft-soled shoes making minimal noise against the polished linoleum. She walked with purpose, but without urgency, the measured pace of someone who had all day to accomplish their assigned tasks. Her peripheral vision, however, was cataloging everything: exit locations, security camera positions, the casual conversations that revealed which personnel were discussing classified operations with insufficient operational security. Old habits died hard, and some habits were too valuable to let die at all. The elevator ride to the third floor was shared with a Marine lieutenant colonel whose sleeve bore the distinctive insignia of Force Recon. He spent the 30-second journey studying his phone, completely unaware that the unremarkable woman beside him had identified his unit, deployment history, and likely current assignment based on visual cues that most people would never notice. The slight fade lines on his uniform indicated recent desert deployment. The specific wear pattern on his boots suggested amphibious operations training. The barely visible tan line on his wrist showed he'd recently stopped wearing a tactical watch, meaning he was back from an operational deployment within the past 2 weeks. "Have a good day, ma'am," he said politely as the elevator doors opened, his tone carrying the automatic courtesy that military personnel extended to all officers, regardless of their perceived importance. Sarah stepped into the third-floor corridor and paused, ostensibly checking her phone but actually allowing her senses to map the environment. The smell of industrial coffee mixed with the faint chemical tang of cleaning supplies. Conversations drifted from open office doors, routine administrative discussions about training schedules, supply requisitions, personnel evaluations. Nothing sensitive. Nothing that suggested the building's occupants understood they were sharing space with someone whose security clearance existed at levels most of them would never access. Room 314 was her destination. A small office tucked between the Base Communications Center and the Intelligence Analysis Division. The nameplate beside the door read Commander Mitchell, Liaison Officer, a title so deliberately vague it practically screamed cover assignment. Sarah inserted her keycard and entered, closing the door behind her with a soft click. The office was standard government issue. Gray metal desk, computer terminal with multiple security dongles, filing cabinet with an impressive array of locks, and a small window that offered a view of the base's main parade ground. Sarah set her coffee on the desk and powered up the computer, entering passwords that granted her access to networks most Coronado personnel didn't know existed. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? As the secure terminal loaded her daily intelligence briefings, Sarah allowed herself a moment to observe the base's morning routine through her window. PT formations moved across the parade ground in perfect synchronization, their cadence calls echoing off the surrounding buildings. Young sailors and Marines, most of them barely out of high school, learning the discipline and pride that would define their military service. She had been their age once, full of enthusiasm and certainty about right and wrong, good and evil. The world had been simpler then, painted in the clear colors of patriotism and duty. 20 years of service in places that didn't appear on any map had added shades of gray that most people never had to contemplate. A knock on her door interrupted her reflection. "Come in," she called, minimizing the classified screens and pulling up routine administrative reports. Petty Officer 3rd Class Rodriguez entered, balancing a stack of folders and a fresh cup of coffee. "Morning, Commander. Here are the daily briefings you requested, plus the personnel files for the new arrivals." He was young, maybe 22, with the eager efficiency of someone determined to make a good impression on every superior officer he encountered. "Thank you, Rodriguez," Sarah said, accepting the files with the same unremarkable courtesy she'd shown everyone since arriving at Coronado 6 weeks earlier. "Any urgent items I should prioritize?" "Nothing critical, ma'am. The usual reports from various departments, some routine requests for intelligence analysis support. Oh, and there's an invitation to tonight's informal gathering at the anchor point. Several officers mentioned they'd like to meet you, since you haven't had much chance to socialize since your transfer." Sarah's expression didn't change, but her mind immediately began calculating the risks and benefits of such exposure. 6 weeks of careful anonymity versus the potential operational intelligence she might gather from casual conversations with personnel who had no reason to guard their words around a forgettable staff officer. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "Thank you for passing along the invitation." After Rodriguez left, Sarah opened the personnel files and began her real work. Not the routine intelligence analysis that her cover position required, but the careful examination of Coronado's operational readiness, security protocols, and personnel vulnerabilities that constituted her actual mission. The file folders contained more than administrative reports. They were windows into the base's soul, revealing patterns that spoke to larger issues within Naval Special Warfare Command. The morning passed in the comfortable rhythm of routine bureaucracy. Sarah attended 2 meetings where she said little and observed everything, processed reports that painted pictures of global operations from fragments of sanitized information, and maintained the careful balance of competence and unremarkability that kept her invisible in plain sight. At 1,200 hours, she walked to the base's main dining facility, her path taking her through areas where she could observe training operations, security procedures, and the countless small details that revealed how seriously Coronado took its mission. The dining facility itself was a study in controlled chaos, hundreds of personnel from various units grabbing quick meals between training evolutions, briefings, and administrative tasks. Sarah selected a table in the corner, positioning herself with clear views of all entrances and exit routes, while maintaining the appearance of someone simply enjoying a quiet lunch alone. Her chicken Caesar salad was standard military food service quality, but her attention was focused on the conversations flowing around her like intelligence streams waiting to be analyzed. At the table to her left, 2 Marine officers discussed upcoming training exercises in terms that revealed deployment timelines and operational focuses. Behind her, a group of Navy intelligence specialists debated the reliability of human intelligence assets in the Middle East, with the casual precision of people who'd never been shot at while depending on those same assets for survival. And near the serving line, a cluster of SEAL candidates argued about Hell Week standards with the competitive intensity that marked every conversation in communities where physical and mental excellence were minimum requirements rather than aspirational goals. None of them paid any attention to the unremarkable commander eating alone in the corner, processing their words through analytical frameworks they'd never heard of, cataloging their insights into databases they didn't know existed. As she prepared to leave, Sarah noticed a disturbance near the dining facility's main entrance. Raised voices, the kind of tension that suggested conflict brewing beneath the surface of military courtesy. She remained seated, watching the situation develop while appearing to focus on finishing her salad. Lieutenant Commander Jake "Hammer" Morrison stood near the dining facility entrance, his massive frame filling the space like a monument to physical conditioning. At 6'4" and 240 pounds of muscle earned through years of SEAL training and combat deployments, he commanded attention through sheer presence. His beard was perfectly groomed to regulation standards, his uniform pressed with creases sharp enough to cut paper, and his chest displayed enough ribbons to tell stories of deployments in every hostile environment on Earth. Hammer was holding court with his usual audience, 4 other SEAL officers whose combined experience read like a highlight reel of the global war on terror. Their conversation was loud enough to carry across half the dining facility, a deliberate performance designed to remind everyone within earshot exactly who occupied the apex of naval special warfare hierarchy. "Problem is," Hammer was saying, his voice carrying the particular brand of authority that came from never being contradicted by anyone who mattered, "half the people on this base think they understand special operations because they've watched a documentary or read a book. They see the uniform and assume they're part of the community." His audience laughed appreciatively, their attention focused on their leader with the intensity of wolves following an alpha. These were serious operators, men who had earned their places in America's most elite military units through years of selection, training, and combat validation. But around Hammer, they became an audience for his particular brand of military theater. "Take intelligence analysis," Hammer continued, gesturing broadly enough to encompass most of the dining facility. "Room full of people who've never been downrange, never had their intel be the difference between mission success and body bags, telling operators how to interpret information about environments they've never seen." Sarah continued eating her salad with mechanical precision, her expression never changing, despite recognizing the building dynamic. This wasn't random conversation. This was the kind of professional posturing that often preceded more direct confrontation. Hammer was working himself up to something, building an audience for whatever performance he had planned. "Especially the women," chimed in Lieutenant Commander Paul "Spike" Stevens, Hammer's closest associate and most reliable enabler. Spike was smaller than Hammer, but carried himself with the coiled intensity of someone always ready for a fight. His sleeve bore the distinctive markings of a SEAL sniper, and his reputation for making impossible shots was matched only by his talent for escalating situations beyond rational resolution. They get their little intelligence degrees, attend some briefings, and suddenly they think they understand what it takes to operate in Indian country. The group's laughter was louder now, drawing attention from surrounding tables. Other personnel were beginning to notice the commotion, some looking uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, others nodding agreement with sentiments that reflected broader cultural tensions within the military community. Sarah set down her fork and pulled out her phone, ostensibly checking messages while actually recording audio through applications that didn't appear in any civilian app store. Not for immediate action, these were standard military personality conflicts that resolved themselves through existing command structures, but for pattern analysis that might prove relevant to her larger mission. "Perfect example," Hammer announced, his voice rising another notch as he spotted his target. "New intelligence liaison, been here 6 weeks, hasn't attended a single social function or made any effort to integrate with operational units. Probably thinks she's too good to associate with knuckle-draggers like us." Sarah realized with professional detachment that she had become the focus of Hammer's performance. His words were directed at her table despite his apparent conversation with his team. This was escalation, the transition from general complaints to specific targeting that often preceded more direct confrontation. She remained seated, continuing to eat while calculating response options. The situation could be diffused through simple departure, gathering her belongings and leaving would remove both the target and the audience for Hammer's theater. Alternatively, engagement might provide intelligence about base dynamics and command structure effectiveness that her cover mission required. "Ma'am," came a voice directly behind her. Sarah turned to find Hammer's massive frame looming over her table, his expression wearing the particular combination of false courtesy and obvious hostility that marked professional bullying. "Don't believe we've been properly introduced. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, SEAL Team 7. Sarah looked up at him with the mild expression of someone interrupted during routine administrative task. "Commander Mitchell," she replied, her voice carrying no particular emotion. "Intelligence Analysis Division." "Right, Intel," Hammer said, his tone making the word sound like a diagnosis of chronic weakness. "Been meaning to ask what's your background. Where'd you serve before Coronado?" The question was loaded with implications that everyone within earshot understood. In the military community, especially within special operations culture, deployment history and operational experience were the primary metrics by which credibility was measured. Hammer was publicly questioning whether Sarah had earned the right to wear the uniform, to hold her rank, to occupy space in a facility where elite warriors prepared for missions that ordinary people couldn't comprehend. "Various assignments," Sarah replied, taking another bite of her salad with deliberate unconcern. "Routine intelligence analysis and liaison duties." Hammer's grin was sharp enough to cut flesh. "Routine assignments. Right. Never been downrange, never had to depend on your intel to keep your teammates alive, never had to make decisions where the wrong analysis means body bags coming home." His team had moved closer now, forming a loose semicircle around Sarah's table that effectively trapped her in the corner, while maintaining plausible deniability about physical intimidation. Other dining facility patrons were watching with the fascination of spectators at a gladiatorial match, sensing drama but uncertain whether to intervene or simply enjoy the show. "I'm sure your experience has been valuable," Sarah said, maintaining the same unremarkable tone she'd used for every conversation since arriving at Coronado. "Different personnel contribute to mission success in different ways." "Different ways?" Spike repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "That's exactly the kind of staff officer bullshit that gets people killed. There's a difference between contributing to mission success and actually accomplishing missions. There's a difference between reading reports and living the reality those reports try to describe." Sarah checked her watch with the gesture of someone tracking routine appointments rather than calculating tactical timelines. The situation was escalating beyond casual workplace tension into something that required response management. Hammer's performance was drawing too much attention, creating visibility that threatened her operational security. "Gentlemen," she said, standing slowly and gathering her belongings with unhurried efficiency, "I appreciate the conversation, but I have meetings to attend." Hammer stepped slightly to his left, not quite blocking her path, but clearly indicating that her departure would require his permission. It was a subtle assertion of dominance, the kind of power play that established hierarchy without crossing lines that would trigger official intervention. "Actually, ma'am, we're not quite finished," he said, his false courtesy becoming more obviously strained. "You see, there's something that's been bothering me about you. 6 weeks on base, minimal interaction with operational units, no visible deployment history. Makes a man wonder if you've ever actually earned that uniform or if it's just a costume you wear to play soldier." The accusation of stolen valor hung in the air like poison gas. Around them, the dining facility had gone quiet, conversations stopping as personnel recognized the severity of what had just been said. In military culture, few accusations carried more weight than suggesting someone was fraudulently claiming service they hadn't performed. Sarah met Hammer's gaze directly for the first time, her green eyes showing no change in expression despite the magnitude of what he'd just implied. When she spoke, her voice remained level, conversational, carrying no hint of the offense that everyone expected. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison," she said, "are you questioning the validity of my military service?" The dining facility had become unnaturally quiet. The kind of silence that preceded either violence or revelation. 200 personnel had stopped eating, stopped talking, stopped moving, all attention focused on the confrontation playing out in the corner, where an unremarkable intelligence officer faced down 5 of the Navy's most elite warriors. Hammer felt the weight of that attention and fed on it, his posture straightening as he realized his audience had expanded beyond his immediate team. This was his moment. The opportunity to publicly establish dominance over yet another staff officer who thought rank meant more than operational experience. "I'm questioning whether you've earned the right to advise operators on missions you've never run, in environments you've never seen, against enemies you've only read about in reports," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent facility. "I'm questioning whether someone who spent their entire career behind desks in air-conditioned offices has any business telling warriors how to do their jobs." Sarah's response was to reach into her laptop bag and extract a worn manila folder, the kind used for personnel records that had been handled by multiple administrative systems over many years. She opened it with deliberate care, her movements unhurried despite the hostility radiating from the men surrounding her. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison," she said, reading from the folder's contents. 3 deployments to Afghanistan, 2 to Iraq, 1 classified operation in an undisclosed location. Bronze Star with V device, Purple Heart, Combat Action Ribbon. Graduated SEAL Training Class, 247, Distinguished Honor Graduate, currently assigned to SEAL Team 7 as Assault Team Leader. She closed the folder and looked up at him with the same unremarkable expression she'd worn throughout the encounter. "Is my summary accurate?" Hammer's confidence flickered for a moment. Personnel records weren't classified information, but they also weren't typically accessible to random staff officers without specific reason and authorization. How had she obtained detailed information about his service history, and why had she been carrying it in her personal files? "That information is readily available to anyone with appropriate clearances," he replied, but his tone had lost some of its earlier certainty. "Doesn't change the fact that you haven't answered my question about your own qualifications." Sarah nodded as if acknowledging a reasonable request, then surprised everyone by moving past Hammer's position toward the dining facility's main display board. The large monitor typically showed base announcements, weather information, and routine administrative messages. Sarah approached the touchscreen interface and began navigating through menu options with the fluid efficiency of someone intimately familiar with military information systems. "What are you doing?" Spike demanded, but Sarah ignored him, her attention focused on accessing display functions that shouldn't have been available to routine personnel. The main screen flickered, then displayed a map of Afghanistan's eastern provinces, marked with operational zones and deployment timelines. Red markers indicated hostile contact locations. Blue showed friendly force positions, and yellow highlighted areas of particular strategic importance during the height of combat operations. "October 2018, Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent dining facility. "Operation Copper Mountain, Eastern Afghanistan. SEAL Team 7 conducted a high-value target interdiction mission in Nangarhar Province. Intelligence indicated minimal enemy presence, routine extraction timeline." Hammer's face had gone pale. Operation Copper Mountain was classified information, discussed only in secure briefing rooms among personnel with specific need-to-know authorization. How was this staff officer accessing and publicly displaying details about missions that existed only in encrypted databases? The intelligence was wrong. Sarah continued, touching the screen to zoom in on a specific valley marked with multiple red indicators. "Your team encountered a reinforced Taliban position, 60 enemy fighters with heavy weapons positioned in terrain that negated air support advantages. Mission parameters changed from routine interdiction to survival and escape." She turned from the display to face Hammer directly, her green eyes holding his with an intensity that made him want to step backward. For the first time in the conversation, her voice carried something beyond bureaucratic courtesy, a depth of knowledge that spoke to first-hand experience with the realities she was describing. You held that ridge for 4 hours, Lieutenant Commander Morrison. Alone. Your entire team was pinned down in the valley below, and you provided overwatch fire that prevented them from being overrun. 17 confirmed enemy kills with precision rifle fire at ranges exceeding 800 meters. In conditions where most snipers would consider accurate fire impossible. The dining facility was absolutely silent now, every person present recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Staff officers didn't possess detailed knowledge about classified SEAL operations. Intelligence analysts didn't discuss sniper techniques with the casual expertise Sarah was demonstrating. And they certainly didn't access restricted information systems to publicly display mission details that were supposed to remain buried in classified archives. "How do you know about Copper Mountain?" Hammer asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That operation is classified beyond because I wrote the intelligence assessment that sent you into that valley," Sarah interrupted, her words cutting through his protest like a blade through silk. "I wrote the report that failed to identify the enemy strength you encountered. I wrote the after-action analysis that recommended your Bronze Star citation for actions that saved your entire team." She moved back to the display screen, touching controls that brought up additional information: satellite imagery, communication intercepts, casualty reports, details that painted a complete picture of an operation that had officially never happened. Intelligence assessment filed by Commander S. Mitchell, Special Operations Analysis Division, she continued, reading from the screen. Primary Analyst for JSOC Operations in Afghanistan's Eastern Provinces, 2017 through 2019. Responsible for pre-mission planning, real-time intelligence support, and post-operation assessment for Tier 1 operations conducted by SEAL, Delta Force, and Ranger units. Hammer was staring at her with an expression of growing recognition and dawning horror. JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, was the military's most classified organization, responsible for the nation's most sensitive counter-terrorism operations. Personnel assigned to JSOC worked at clearance levels that most military officers never achieved, dealing with information that could reshape global conflicts if mishandled. "That's impossible," Spike said, but his voice lacked conviction. JSOC analysts don't get assigned to routine base positions. They don't serve as liaison officers for standard intelligence divisions. Sarah's smile was small and knowing, the expression of someone who'd spent years letting people underestimate her capabilities. "Who said this assignment was routine?" She returned to the display controls, accessing files that made several observers shift uncomfortably in their seats. These weren't routine military records. They were operational summaries of missions that spanned multiple theaters of operation, involving units whose very existence was rarely acknowledged in public discourse. Operation Ghost Storm, Syria, 2019. Operation Silent Thunder, Iraq, 2020. Operation Broken Arrow, location classified, 2021. Each mission appeared on the screen as she spoke, showing satellite imagery, force deployment diagrams, and casualty reports that painted pictures of warfare at its most sophisticated and lethal level. Analyst, Commander S. Mitchell. Intelligence Assessment, Commander S. Mitchell. Operational Outcome Evaluation, Commander S. Mitchell. Her name appeared repeatedly in the classified records, associated with missions that had shaped America's counter-terrorism strategy for the past 5 years. The weight of revelation was settling over the dining facility like smoke from a battlefield. Personnel who had ignored the unremarkable liaison officer for 6 weeks were now staring at someone whose professional history suggested capabilities far beyond routine intelligence analysis. This wasn't a staff officer playing soldier. This was someone who had been making life-and-death decisions about America's most classified operations, while maintaining perfect cover as a forgettable, administrative functionary. But Sarah wasn't finished. She touched one final control on the display screen, accessing a database that made Hammer's team step backward involuntarily. The screen filled with organizational charts, showing command structures for special operations units across all service branches. Names, faces, operational specialties, and deployment histories for personnel who weren't supposed to exist in any official records. JSOC maintains comprehensive files on all personnel assigned to Tier 1 operations, Sarah said, her voice taking on the clinical tone of someone presenting intelligence briefings to audiences with unlimited security clearances. Performance evaluations, psychological assessments, operational readiness status, personal vulnerabilities that might compromise mission security. She pointed to Hammer's photograph, which appeared prominently in the SEAL Team 7 organizational chart. Lieutenant Commander Morrison. Psychological profile indicates strong leadership capabilities offset by tendency toward dominance displays and territorial behavior. Recommended for continued operational status with notation regarding interpersonal conflict management. Hammer was speechless, staring at his own classified file being displayed on a public screen by someone he'd been attempting to intimidate moments earlier. The psychological assessment was accurate enough to be professionally embarrassing, detailing behavioral patterns he thought he'd kept hidden from official evaluation. The question, Lieutenant Commander Morrison, Sarah said, closing the display and returning to her original position, isn't whether I've earned the right to wear this uniform. The question is whether you understand that some uniforms carry responsibilities you can't see, for missions you don't know exist, in service of objectives that extend far beyond the operations that make you feel important. The silence that followed was complete and profound. 200 military personnel, including some of the Navy's most elite warriors, faced the recognition that they had been in the presence of someone operating at levels of classification and responsibility that redefined their understanding of how the military actually functioned. Sarah gathered her belongings with the same unhurried efficiency she'd shown throughout the encounter. Gentlemen, I have meetings to attend. Thank you for the conversation. As she walked toward the exit, Hammer found his voice one final time. Wait, he called, desperation creeping into his tone. If you're really JSOC, if you really have that level of clearance, then what's your call sign? Sarah paused at the dining facility door, her hand on the handle, and turned back to face the room full of personnel who were all waiting for her response. For the first time since the confrontation began, she allowed something beyond professional courtesy to show in her expression, a depth of experience that spoke to places darker than most people ever had to contemplate. When she spoke, her voice carried authority that seemed to fill every corner of the facility, despite barely rising above conversational level. That, she said, is information you're not cleared to receive. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded like thunder in the absolute silence she left behind. The secure communications center in Building 317 was a hive of controlled chaos at 1,347 hours when the priority alert began broadcasting across Naval Base Coronado's emergency frequencies. Sarah had been reviewing classified intelligence reports in her office when the distinctive tone of a flash override message cut through the afternoon routine like a blade through silk. Her secure terminal immediately displayed the alert header. Pinnacle, broken arrow. Immediate response required. The classification level made her blood run cold. Broken arrow incidents, nuclear weapon accidents, or security compromises were the Pentagon's highest priority emergency, the kind of situation that could reshape global politics if mishandled. Sarah was already moving toward the communication center when her encrypted phone buzzed with a message from a number that didn't officially exist. Ghost protocol activated. Report to SCIF immediately. Time critical. The sensitive compartmented information facility was located in Building 317's basement, accessible only through biometric scanners that verified not just identity, but current authorization for the day's specific operations. Sarah's clearances granted her access to levels that most base personnel didn't know existed, but even she felt the weight of what broken arrow protocols meant for everyone on Coronado. The elevator descent to the SCIF seemed to take forever, though her watch showed only 37 seconds. When the doors opened, She stepped into a world that existed parallel to the base's normal operations, a realm of classified communications, real-time intelligence feeds, and personnel whose very presence at Coronado was considered sensitive information. "Commander Mitchell, thank God," came a voice from across the communications center. Captain Elizabeth Hayes, the base's senior intelligence officer, was coordinating multiple phone conversations while monitoring data streams from terminals that displayed information Sarah recognized as coming from the highest levels of military command. "Site trep," Sarah said, falling into the clipped efficiency of emergency protocols as she approached Hayes's position. "We have a situation developing in the Pacific Fleet," Hayes said, lowering her voice despite the skiff's security measures. "USS Helena, Los Angeles-class submarine, experienced a reactor emergency 47 minutes ago. They're currently running on battery power with primary systems failing. But that's not the worst part." Sarah felt the familiar cold clarity that came with crisis management. Her mind automatically spec'd, shifting into analytical mode as she processed the implications. What's the worst part? Helena was conducting a classified mission in international waters off the North Korean coast. They have a full complement of tactical nuclear weapons aboard, and their emergency ascent put them in a position where North Korean coastal radar has acquired them. Pyongyang is interpreting the submarine's presence as preparation for a preemptive nuclear strike. The weight of the situation settled over Sarah like lead blankets. A disabled American nuclear submarine in North Korean territorial waters, carrying enough firepower to level cities, with a paranoid regime already convinced that the United States was planning an attack. This was how nuclear wars started, through misunderstanding, mechanical failure, and the deadly combination of advanced weapons with insufficient time for diplomatic resolution. "Current status?" Sarah asked, moving to a terminal that displayed real-time intelligence feeds from multiple satellite sources. "North Korea has activated their entire coastal defense network," Hayes continued, her voice carrying the strain of someone coordinating a crisis that could escalate beyond conventional warfare. "3 submarines moving to intercept Helena, plus multiple surface vessels. Their rhetoric through diplomatic channels suggests they believe this is the opening move of an American invasion." Sarah studied the satellite imagery showing naval movements in the Yellow Sea. The North Korean response was massive and coordinated, involving assets from multiple service branches. This wasn't a routine territorial probe, this was preparation for war. "Time to complete Helena's repairs?" she asked. "Unknown. Their engineering department is working on primary reactor systems, but estimates range from 4 hours to 48 hours. They can't move more than 5 knots on battery power, which means they can't outrun North Korean submarines even if they wanted to. Retreat. The tactical situation was impossible by any conventional analysis. Helena couldn't fight. Engaging North Korean forces would be an act of war. They couldn't flee. Their damaged systems prevented any meaningful escape, and they couldn't surrender. The nuclear weapons aboard made capture unthinkable from both military and diplomatic perspectives. Sarah's mind raced through possible solutions, drawing on years of experience with crisis management at the highest levels of classification. But before she could formulate recommendations, alarms began sounding throughout the skiff with urgent intensity that made everyone freeze. "What now?" Hayes asked, reaching for communications equipment that was already crackling with incoming transmissions. The main display screen, filled with real-time tactical data from the Pacific Fleet, showing naval movements that painted a picture of rapidly escalating crisis. Additional American submarines were moving toward Helena's position, while North Korean forces continued to mass in what intelligence analysts were interpreting as preparation for immediate action. "Flash traffic from PAC Fleet," announced Chief Petty Officer Martinez, the senior communications technician. "North Korean submarine detected launching torpedoes at USS Helena. American submarine under direct attack." Repeat, American submarine under attack. The SCIF erupted in controlled chaos as personnel coordinated responses to what had suddenly become an active combat situation involving nuclear weapons in one of the world's most politically sensitive regions. Hayes was on secure phones with Pentagon officials, while other personnel managed intelligence feeds and communication links that kept Washington informed of developments in real time. But Sarah noticed something in the tactical data that others were missing, a pattern in the North Korean movements that suggested their response was following predetermined protocols rather than improvised crisis management. She moved to a classified terminal and began accessing intelligence databases that most SCIF personnel weren't cleared to use. "Captain Hayes," she called, her voice cutting through the emergency communications with authority that made everyone in the facility turn to listen. "I need immediate access to Ghost Storm protocols." Hayes paused in her phone conversation, her expression showing recognition of classification levels that extended beyond routine intelligence operations. "Ghost Storm is above my clearance level, Commander. I can't authorize access to those files." "Then get me someone who can," Sarah replied, her tone carrying urgency that brooked no argument. "Because what's happening in the Yellow Sea isn't random escalation. This is a planned operation, and if I'm right, Helena's reactor emergency wasn't an accident." The Ghost Storm database required authentication from 3 separate sources before granting Sarah access to files that existed at classification levels reserved for the military's most sensitive operations. As the system verified her credentials, she was acutely aware that everyone in the SCIF was watching her with growing recognition that the unremarkable liaison officer was operating with authorities they hadn't suspected. The files that appeared on her terminal painted a disturbing picture of North Korean intelligence capabilities and long-term strategic planning. Ghost Storm was a classified analysis program that tracked patterns in enemy operations, identifying coordinated activities that appeared random to surface analysis but revealed sophisticated planning when examined through comprehensive intelligence frameworks. "Captain Hayes," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the SCIF with authority that commanded immediate attention. "Helena's reactor emergency was sabotage. North Korean intelligence assets have been planning this scenario for 18 months. Hayes ended her phone conversation abruptly. "Explain. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now, back to the story. Sarah's fingers moved across the classified terminal with efficiency that demonstrated intimate familiarity with intelligence systems most personnel never accessed. The main display screen filled with data streams showing patterns of North Korean activity over the past 2 years. Personnel movements, communication intercepts, naval positioning that appeared routine when examined individually but revealed careful coordination when analyzed as part of a larger operation. March 2023. North Korean intelligence recruited a maintenance technician at Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard, Sarah said, highlighting specific entries in the classified database. July 2023. Unusual electromagnetic signals detected near Helena during routine maintenance period. September 2023. North Korean submarine activity increases in international waters along 23 Helena's typical patrol routes. The pattern was becoming clear to everyone watching, but Sarah wasn't finished. She accessed additional files that showed the scope of planning behind what appeared to be spontaneous crisis. North Korea has been waiting for Helena to conduct a classified mission in their territorial waters, she continued. The reactor sabotage was triggered remotely, timed to disable the submarine at the exact moment when their naval forces were positioned for maximum psychological and tactical impact. Chief Martinez looked up from his communication terminal with obvious concern. "Ma'am, if this is planned sabotage, that means North Korea has been preparing for nuclear confrontation. They're not reacting to perceived American aggression. They're implementing a strategy designed to force American strategic withdrawal from the Pacific." Sarah nodded grimly, which means their next move isn't going to be defensive positioning. They're going to escalate aggressively, forcing us to choose between nuclear engagement and diplomatic capitulation that undermines our entire Pacific defense strategy. As if summoned by her words, alarms sounded again throughout the SCIF. Martinez was receiving multiple priority transmissions simultaneously, his expression growing more concerned with each incoming message. "Flash traffic from multiple sources," he announced. "North Korean forces have surrounded Helena's position. They're demanding immediate surrender of all nuclear weapons and American withdrawal from the Yellow Sea. Deadline: 30 minutes. Hayes was already reaching for secure phones that connected directly to Pentagon crisis management centers. Washington needs to know about the sabotage analysis. If this is planned provocation rather than spontaneous crisis, our response options change dramatically. But Sarah was studying tactical data that painted an even more disturbing picture. "Captain, there's something else. The North Korean naval positioning isn't just surrounding Helena. They're creating a tactical environment where any American rescue attempt triggers automatic escalation to nuclear weapons use." She highlighted positions on the tactical display showing North Korean submarines and surface vessels arranged in patterns that channeled American response options toward increasingly dangerous confrontations. "This is a strategic trap. Every move we make to help Helena forces us closer to the kind of nuclear brinksmanship that benefits North Korean political objectives." The realization was settling over everyone in the SCIF that they were facing something unprecedented in modern military crisis management. Not just an accident involving nuclear weapons, but a carefully orchestrated provocation designed to force American decision-makers into choosing between unacceptable options. "Recommendations?" Hayes asked, recognizing that Sarah's analysis was revealing layers of complexity that routine crisis protocols hadn't anticipated. Sarah was quiet for 30 seconds, her mind racing through possible responses while monitoring incoming intelligence that painted increasingly grim pictures of escalating crisis. When she spoke, her voice carried the calm authority of someone accustomed to making decisions where failure meant catastrophic consequences. "We need to activate Prometheus protocols," she said. The effect on the SCIF was immediate and profound. Hayes stepped backward involuntarily, her face draining of color. Martinez's hands froze over his communication equipment. The other personnel exchanged glances that spoke to recognition of classification levels most of them had heard about but never encountered. Prometheus protocols existed at the intersection of military special operations and intelligence community capabilities. Designed for crisis situations where conventional response options had been eliminated by enemy action. These weren't standard military procedures, they were methodologies that officially didn't exist, implemented by personnel whose identities were classified at levels that protected them even from other government agencies. "Commander Mitchell," Hayes said slowly, "Prometheus authorization requires clearances that I don't have access to, and personnel certification that." She paused, understanding dawning in her expression as she recognized implications she'd been missing throughout their interaction. "Captain Hayes," Sarah said, her voice carrying authority that filled the skiff despite barely rising above conversational level, "I need you to contact Admiral Morrison through Crimson Channel Communications. Tell him Ghost Commander is requesting immediate Prometheus activation for Pacific Fleet Crisis Management. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one." The title, Ghost Commander, hit the skiff like an electromagnetic pulse, shutting down all conversation and activity as personnel realized they were in the presence of someone whose very existence redefined their understanding of how America's most sensitive operations were actually conducted. Hayes's secure phone was already in her hand, but she was staring at Sarah with an expression that combined professional respect with something approaching awe. "Ghost Commander," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought that was just a legend." "Legends are useful for operational security," Sarah replied. "Reality is useful for preventing nuclear wars." As Hayes began making calls that would connect the skiff to the highest levels of military command, Sarah turned her attention back to the tactical situation developing in the Yellow Sea. Helena remained surrounded and disabled, North Korean forces were maintaining their ultimatum, and the clock was counting down toward decisions that could reshape global politics. But for the first time since the crisis began, Sarah felt the cold satisfaction that came with having access to capabilities that enemy planners hadn't anticipated. North Korea had prepared for conventional American responses to their provocation. They hadn't prepared for Ghost Commander protocols implemented by someone whose identity and capabilities existed beyond conventional military structure. "Martinez," she called, her voice carrying the command authority that came with classifications most personnel never achieved. "I need real-time satellite feed on all North Korean positions, plus communication intercepts from their command structure. Full-spectrum intelligence, unrestricted access." "Ma'am," Martinez replied, his hands moving across control systems, with the efficiency of someone following orders from authority he recognized but didn't fully understand. "Those systems require clearances that most personnel—" "Chief," Sarah interrupted, "I'm Ghost Commander. I don't require clearances. I grant them." The transformation in the skiff was remarkable, as personnel recognized they were working with someone whose authority transcended routine military hierarchy. Sarah wasn't just another intelligence officer coordinating crisis response. She was someone empowered to implement solutions that existed outside conventional frameworks, using capabilities that officially didn't exist to prevent catastrophes that couldn't be resolved through normal diplomatic channels. Admiral James Morrison received Captain Hayes's call in his Pentagon office at 1,423 hours, 37 minutes into what was rapidly becoming the most dangerous nuclear crisis since the Cuban Missile Confrontation. Morrison was a 28-year veteran who'd commanded carrier groups in multiple theaters and managed intelligence operations that shaped America's global strategic position. But Hayes's message made him pause in the middle of coordinating Pacific Fleet. Response: "Ghost Commander is requesting Prometheus activation," Hayes repeated, her voice carrying clearly through the secure communication link. "She's here at Coronado, providing crisis analysis for the Helena situation." Morrison set down the classified reports he'd been reviewing and focused entirely on the conversation. Ghost Commander was a classification that appeared in intelligence briefings so heavily redacted that most Pentagon officials knew only that the position existed, not who occupied it or what authorities it carried. "Authenticate," Morrison said, falling back on protocols designed to prevent unauthorized access to capabilities that could reshape global conflicts if misused. "Authentication confirmed through Crimson Channel communications," Hayes replied. "Ghost Commander's identity verification complete. She's requesting immediate implementation of Prometheus protocols for Pacific crisis management." Morrison was quiet for several seconds, his mind racing through implications that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Prometheus protocols had been developed for scenarios where conventional military and diplomatic responses had been systematically eliminated by enemy action, requiring solutions that existed outside normal operational frameworks. Activating these protocols meant acknowledging that the United States faced threats sophisticated enough to neutralize traditional response capabilities. "Put her on the line," Morrison said finally. Sarah's voice came through the secure connection with the calm clarity of someone accustomed to briefing officials at the highest levels of classification. "Admiral Morrison, this is Ghost Commander. I'm requesting immediate Prometheus activation for coordinated response to North Korean strategic provocation in the Yellow Sea." Morrison had spent decades working with intelligence personnel from every agency and service branch. But Ghost Commander's voice carried authority that transcended conventional military hierarchy. This wasn't someone requesting permission, this was someone informing him of decisions that had already been made at levels of classification he couldn't access. "Ghost Commander, provide situation analysis," Morrison said, recognizing that his role was to facilitate rather than authorize whatever operations Ghost Commander deemed necessary. "North Korean intelligence has been planning this crisis for 18 months, Sarah replied, her words painting a picture of strategic deception that reframed the entire situation. Helena's reactor emergency was sabotage, triggered by assets recruited through long-term penetration operations. The North Korean response isn't defensive, it's the implementation of a coordinated strategy designed to force American strategic withdrawal from the Pacific through nuclear brinksmanship. Morrison felt cold recognition settle in his chest. If Ghost Commander's analysis was accurate, the United States was facing something unprecedented in modern warfare, a nuclear crisis engineered by enemy intelligence to force strategic concessions that couldn't be achieved through conventional military or diplomatic pressure. "What are you proposing?" Morrison asked. "Prometheus protocols include contingencies for scenarios where enemy forces have successfully neutralized conventional response options," Sarah said. "I'm proposing implementation of non-conventional solutions that North Korean planners haven't anticipated." The secure communication line carried Morrison's breathing for several seconds as he processed the implications of what Ghost Commander was requesting. Prometheus protocols existed beyond congressional oversight, beyond normal military command structure, beyond the diplomatic frameworks that typically constrained American responses to international crises. "Ghost Commander," Morrison said finally, "you have authorization for Prometheus implementation, full Pentagon support, unlimited resources, complete operational autonomy. Do what needs to be done." Back in the Coronado skiff, Sarah's acknowledgement was simple and professional. "Understood, Admiral. Prometheus protocols activated. I'll provide updates as operations develop." She ended the communication and turned to face the skiff personnel who had been listening to the conversation with expressions of growing recognition that they were witnessing something unprecedented in their military experience. "Captain Hayes," Sarah said, her voice carrying command authority that transformed the facility's operational dynamics, "I need immediate access to classified communication systems for coordination with assets that don't appear in conventional order of battle documents." Hayes was already moving toward terminals that granted access to communication networks most personnel didn't know existed. "What do you need?" "Contact with Crimson Cell operatives in the Pacific Theater," Sarah replied, her fingers moving across control systems with efficiency that demonstrated intimate familiarity with capabilities reserved for the military's most classified operations, plus real-time coordination with submarine rescue capabilities that officially don't exist. The transformation in Sarah's demeanor was remarkable for those watching. The unremarkable liaison officer had disappeared completely, replaced by someone whose competence and authority suggested experience with crisis management at the highest levels of national security decision-making. Martinez looked up from his communication terminal with obvious confusion. "Ma'am, Crimson Cell communications require authentication codes that most personnel don't have access to." Sarah's response was to input a series of codes that granted her access to networks Martinez had heard about but never seen. The main display screen filled with real-time intelligence feeds showing submarine positions, North Korean naval movements, and communication intercepts that painted a comprehensive picture of the developing crisis. "Crimson Cell assets. This is Ghost Commander," she said into the secure communication system. "Implement Prometheus protocols for Pacific Fleet crisis resolution. Authorization code, Tango 7-7 Blackwater." The response came immediately from multiple sources: submarines that didn't appear in official fleet rosters, special operations personnel whose deployment locations were classified beyond normal intelligence access, technical specialists whose capabilities existed at the intersection of military and intelligence community operations. "Ghost Commander. Crimson Cell assets, standing by for operational direction," came the reply through communication systems that officially didn't exist. "Pacific Theater resources available for immediate deployment." Sarah began coordinating operations that would never appear in any official record, using capabilities that enemy intelligence hadn't anticipated because they existed outside conventional military structure. The North Korean strategic trap was about to encounter American response capabilities that their planning hadn't considered. Phase 1, she announced to the skiff personnel who were watching the implementation of protocols most of them had never heard of. involves neutralizing the sabotage device aboard Helena while simultaneously creating tactical confusion in North Korean command structure. Hayes was monitoring communications from the Pentagon while tracking Sarah's coordination with assets that appeared to exist beyond normal military hierarchy. How is that possible? Helena is surrounded by North Korean forces, and any rescue attempt triggers escalation. Sarah's smile was cold and professional, the expression of someone about to implement solutions that existed outside conventional tactical thinking. Captain Hayes, North Korean planners prepared for American responses using assets they know about. They didn't prepare for assets they don't know exist, implementing capabilities they've never encountered, coordinated by personnel whose identities are classified beyond their intelligence access. The next 30 minutes would demonstrate why Ghost Commander protocols existed, why certain military capabilities remained classified at levels that protected them even from congressional oversight, and why some problems required solutions that officially couldn't be acknowledged even after they succeeded. North Korea had engineered a nuclear crisis designed to force American strategic withdrawal from the Pacific. They were about to discover that America's actual crisis response capabilities extended far beyond anything their intelligence services had anticipated. At 1,507 hours, USS Helena's engineering department reported successful neutralization of the sabotage device that had crippled their reactor systems. The technical specialists who accomplished this feat had arrived aboard the submarine through methods that would never appear in any official record, using equipment that officially didn't exist, coordinated by someone whose authority transcended conventional military command structure. In the Coronado skiff, Sarah monitored real-time feeds showing North Korean naval forces maintaining their aggressive posture despite Helena's restored mobility. Their ultimatum remained in effect: surrender all nuclear weapons or face immediate attack, but their tactical situation had changed dramatically in ways their command structure didn't yet understand. Ghost Commander, came the voice through Crimson Cell communications. Phase 1 complete. Helena is mobile and combat ready. North Korean forces are maintaining encirclement, but their coordination has been disrupted by selective communication interference. Sarah studied tactical displays showing the complex dance of naval forces in the Yellow Sea. North Korean submarines maintained attack positions around Helena, but their ability to coordinate simultaneous strikes had been quietly eliminated by electronic warfare capabilities they hadn't known to defend against. Initiate Phase 2, Sarah ordered, her voice carrying across secure communication networks to assets positioned throughout the Pacific theater. Implement demonstration protocols, full spectrum, non-lethal, maximum psychological impact. What happened next would be studied in classified military colleges for decades, though the true scope of operations would remain hidden even from most military historians. North Korean radar operators detected multiple submarine contacts appearing simultaneously across the Yellow Sea, not just American submarines from the Pacific Fleet, but vessels with acoustic signatures that didn't match any known naval technology. Captain Hayes, Sarah said, monitoring intelligence feeds that painted a picture of carefully orchestrated tactical theater. North Korean command is receiving reports of 23 submarine contacts in positions that should be tactically impossible. Their strategic planning assumed American response would be limited to conventional Pacific Fleet assets. Hayes was coordinating with Pentagon officials who were trying to understand how the tactical situation had changed so dramatically in such a short time frame. What are they seeing? How many submarines do we actually have in the area? Sarah's smile held depths that spoke to capabilities most people never had to contemplate. That information is classified beyond your current authorization level, Captain. But North Korean intelligence is discovering that their assessment of American naval capabilities was incomplete. The psychological warfare was precise and devastating. North Korean sonar operators were detecting submarine signatures that suggested American naval technology had advanced far beyond their intelligence estimates. Communication intercepts revealed growing confusion in their command structure as tactical assessments painted pictures of American naval dominance that challenged fundamental assumptions about Pacific Fleet capabilities. But Sarah wasn't finished. Phase 3 involved assets that existed at the intersection of military special operations and intelligence community capabilities, personnel whose very existence was classified at levels that protected them from congressional oversight. "All stations, this is Ghost Commander," she announced through communication networks that connected to facilities around the globe. "Implement Pacific Storm Protocols. Authorization Code Prometheus 77 Alpha." The response was immediate and comprehensive. Across the Pacific Theater, assets that didn't appear in any official order of battle began implementing operations that would demonstrate American crisis response capabilities extending far beyond conventional military planning. North Korean coastal radar installations began experiencing technical difficulties that blinded their early warning networks. Communication satellites that provided coordination between their naval forces encountered atmospheric interference that disrupted command and control. Supply vessels moving to support their encirclement of Helena suffered mechanical failures that left them dead in the water. "Jesus Christ," Martinez whispered, monitoring communication intercepts that revealed the scope of what was happening to North Korean military capabilities. "Their entire crisis response is falling apart. How is this possible?" Sarah turned from her coordination terminal to address the SCIF personnel who were witnessing the implementation of capabilities they'd never imagined. "Chief Martinez, North Korean planners spent 18 months preparing for this crisis based on intelligence assessments of American military capabilities that were deliberately limited to information they were allowed to acquire." She gestured toward the displays showing North Korean forces struggling with coincidental equipment, failures, and communication problems that were systematically dismantling their tactical advantages. They prepared for war with America's visible military assets. They didn't prepare for war with America's actual military capabilities. The demonstration was working. Intelligence intercepts revealed growing panic in North Korean command centers as their carefully planned strategic trap dissolved into tactical chaos. Their submarines couldn't coordinate attacks when their communication systems failed. Their surface vessels couldn't maintain positioning when their navigation equipment malfunctioned. Their coastal defenses couldn't track targets when their radar networks went offline. But most importantly, their political leadership was receiving reports that challenged fundamental assumptions about American naval capabilities and crisis response options. The United States wasn't behaving like a nation forced to choose between nuclear escalation and strategic withdrawal. It was behaving like a nation with capabilities that made North Korean provocation strategically irrelevant. At 1,534 hours, the breakthrough came through diplomatic channels that had been carefully prepared by intelligence operations North Korean leadership didn't know existed. Their ambassador to China received a message from American diplomatic personnel that reframed the entire crisis in terms that made continued confrontation strategically counterproductive. "Captain Hayes," Sarah said, monitoring diplomatic communications through channels that existed beyond conventional State Department structure, "North Korean leadership is requesting immediate de-escalation talks. They're offering to withdraw naval forces in exchange for American commitment to resume normal patrol patterns in international waters." Hayes looked up from her coordination with Pentagon officials, her expression showing recognition that Sarah had accomplished something unprecedented in modern crisis management. "They're backing down? Just like that?" "They're recognizing that their strategic assumptions were based on incomplete intelligence," Sarah replied. "When your entire plan depends on forcing your enemy to choose between unacceptable options, discovering that your enemy has acceptable options you didn't know about tends to encourage diplomatic flexibility." But as North Korean forces began withdrawing from their encirclement of Helena, another situation was developing that would test Sarah's capabilities in ways that electronic warfare and psychological operations couldn't address. The SCIF's main entrance opened to admit a stream of personnel that transformed the facility's atmosphere through sheer command presence. Admiral Morrison had arrived at Coronado aboard a priority transport, accompanied by officials representing every branch of military service and several agencies whose involvement suggested the crisis had attracted attention from the highest levels of national security decision-making. "Ghost Commander," Morrison announced as he entered the skiff, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Behind him stood officers whose rank insignia and ribbon displays suggested collective experience with America's most classified operations over the past 3 decades. Sarah turned from her coordination terminal, and for the first time since the crisis began, the skiff personnel could see something approaching uncertainty in her expression. Not tactical concern. The North Korean situation was resolving exactly as her operations had intended, but the recognition that her operational security was about to be tested in ways that electronic countermeasures couldn't protect against. "Admiral Morrison," she replied, her voice maintaining the calm authority she demonstrated throughout the crisis. "Pacific situation is stable and de-escalating according to operational parameters." Morrison approached Sarah's position with deliberate purpose, his eyes taking in the tactical displays and communication equipment that painted a comprehensive picture of operations that officially didn't exist. "Ghost Commander, I need to know exactly who I've been giving unlimited authorization to for the past 2 hours." The question hung in the air with weight that made everyone in the SCIF understand they were about to witness something unprecedented in their military experience. Morrison wasn't questioning Sarah's capabilities or authorities. The successful resolution of the North Korean crisis had demonstrated both beyond doubt. But he was asserting his responsibility as a senior military official to understand exactly what assets he'd been coordinating with. Sarah was quiet for several seconds, her mind calculating the implications of full disclosure to personnel who weren't cleared for information about her actual identity and position within the military structure. When she spoke, her voice carried authority that seemed to fill the facility despite barely rising above conversational level. "Admiral Morrison, that information requires security clearances that extend beyond conventional military classification levels." Morrison's response was immediate and definitive. "Ghost Commander, I'm Admiral James Morrison, Commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, with clearances that include oversight responsibility for all special operations personnel assigned to Pacific Theater operations. I'm ordering you to provide complete identification and authorization verification." The confrontation represented something unprecedented in modern military hierarchy, a flag officer demanding accountability from someone whose authorities had proven to transcend his own command structure. Everyone in the SCIF recognized they were witnessing a collision between conventional military hierarchy and classification systems that existed outside normal organizational frameworks. Sarah met Morrison's gaze directly, her green eyes holding depths that spoke to experiences in places that didn't appear on any map. When she spoke, her words would reshape everyone's understanding of how America's most sensitive operations were actually conducted. "Admiral Morrison, my name is Sarah Mitchell. My rank is Rear Admiral, United States Navy. My position is Director of Special Operations and Crisis Management for the Defense Intelligence Agency's Special Access Programs. My call sign is Ghost Commander because I coordinate operations that officially don't exist, using assets that officially aren't there, for missions that officially never happen." The revelation hit the skiff like a concussion grenade, creating a moment of absolute silence that seemed to stretch beyond the boundaries of normal time. The unremarkable liaison officer who'd been dismissed as routine administrative personnel had just identified herself as a flag officer whose authorities transcended conventional military structure. Rear Admiral, not Commander, not Lieutenant Commander, but flag rank that placed her among the Navy's senior leadership. Director of Special Operations for Defense Intelligence Agency programs that existed beyond congressional oversight, and Ghost Commander, a call sign that represented capabilities most military personnel never encountered throughout entire careers of classified service. Admiral Morrison's expression cycled through surprise, recognition, and something approaching professional embarrassment as he realized the full scope of what had occurred. He'd been coordinating crisis response with someone whose rank and position placed her authority well beyond his own operational purview. Rear Admiral Mitchell, Morrison said, his voice carrying the formal respect due to superior rank, combined with recognition of capabilities that extended far beyond conventional flag officer responsibilities. I apologize for not recognizing your position immediately. Sarah's response was gracious and professional, but her words carried implications that redefined everyone's understanding of how the military's most sensitive operations were actually conducted. Admiral Morrison, operational security requires that certain positions remain invisible, even to personnel with appropriate clearances. Your crisis coordination was exemplary under circumstances that deliberately obscured command relationships. But the real impact was on the SCIF personnel who'd been working alongside someone they'd assumed was a routine intelligence officer. Captain Hayes stood at attention with the rigid posture of someone recognizing they'd been in the presence of authority they should have saluted from the first moment of contact. "Ma'am," Hayes said, her voice carrying professional respect mixed with personal mortification, "I should have recognized your position. I apologize for any breach of protocol." "Captain Hayes," Sarah replied, her tone carrying the kind of gracious authority that marked the best military leaders, "your performance during this crisis was outstanding. Operational security requires that certain personnel remain unidentified until circumstances demand otherwise. You couldn't have recognized authorities that were deliberately concealed." Chief Martinez was staring at Sarah with an expression that combined professional awe with recognition of capabilities he'd witnessed but not understood. "Ma'am, the communication systems you accessed, the authorities you exercised, I've never seen anything like it. Chief Martinez, your technical support was crucial to successful crisis resolution," Sarah said, acknowledging his contribution with the respect due to someone whose competence had enabled operations at the highest levels of classification. Special access programs include capabilities that most personnel never encounter, but their implementation depends on skilled technicians like you. The atmosphere in the SCIF was transforming as personnel recognized they'd participated in something unprecedented. A nuclear crisis resolved through implementation of capabilities that existed beyond conventional military structure, coordinated by someone whose identity and authorities challenged fundamental assumptions about how America's national security apparatus actually functioned. But Admiral Morrison wasn't finished. His professional curiosity had been replaced by recognition that he was in the presence of someone whose operational experience represented the pinnacle of military service at levels most flag officers never achieved. "Rear Admiral Mitchell," Morrison said, "your crisis management demonstrated capabilities that go beyond administrative oversight. Your operational coordination suggested first-hand experience with special operations at the highest classification levels." Sarah's response would complete the transformation of understanding about who she was and what her upper service had encompassed. "Admiral Morrison, before my assignment to Defense Intelligence Agency oversight, I spent 12 years in operational positions with units that don't appear in conventional order of battle documents." She moved to the secure terminal and accessed files that painted a picture of military service that redefined heroism for everyone watching. Her service record appeared on the main display, not the sanitized personnel file that had supported her cover as a liaison officer, but the classified documentation of operational assignments that existed beyond normal military career progression. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, SEAL Team 6, 2008 through 2014. Commander Sarah Mitchell, Delta Force Liaison, 2014 through 2017. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, Joint Special Operations Command Crisis Response, 2017 through 2020. Commander Sarah Mitchell, Defense Intelligence Agency Special Access Programs, 2020 through present. Each assignment was accompanied by operational summaries that painted pictures of military service at its most demanding and consequential levels. SEAL Team 6 operations in environments where failure meant death or worse. Delta Force coordination in missions that shaped global counterterrorism strategy. JSOC crisis response that prevented catastrophes most people never knew threatened them. Decorations include Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star with 3 oak leaf clusters, Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters, and classifications that preclude public acknowledgement, Sarah continued, reading from records that would never appear in conventional military biographical materials. Morrison found himself stepping backward involuntarily as the full scope of Sarah's service history became clear. This wasn't just a flag officer with administrative responsibilities. This was someone who'd earned her rank through operational assignments that represented the absolute pinnacle of military service. "Ma'am," Morrison said, his voice carrying profound respect, "your service record represents achievements that most military personnel can only aspire to. It's been an honor to coordinate operations with someone of your caliber." But Sarah wasn't finished. The final element of her revelation would complete the transformation of understanding about her identity and why Ghost Commander protocols existed at classification levels that transcended conventional military structure. "Admiral Morrison, there's one additional element of my background that explains why certain operations require personnel whose identities remain classified even within the military community." She accessed final files that painted the complete picture of her service and its consequences. "My operational assignments have resulted in targeting by hostile intelligence services. My identity is classified not just for operational security, but for personal protection." The implications settled over the skiff like smoke from a battlefield. Ghost Commander wasn't just a call sign representing operational authority, it was protection for someone whose service had made her a target for enemies who would eliminate her if they could identify and locate her. "Which is why," Sarah continued, "certain positions require personnel who officially don't exist, working on operations that officially don't happen, coordinated through command structures that officially aren't there." Share this video right now before Sarah drops the bombshell that will leave everyone speechless. If you've ever felt powerless against impossible situations, what happens next will restore your faith in quiet heroism. The Ghost Commander is about to show why legends exist in the shadows. Morrison understood completely. The United States faced threats that required responses outside conventional diplomatic and military frameworks. Those responses needed to be coordinated by personnel whose capabilities and authorities transcended normal organizational boundaries. And those personnel needed protection from enemies who would target them for elimination if their identities became known. "Rear Admiral Mitchell," Morrison said, rendering a salute that was immediately joined by every person in the skiff, "it has been an honor to witness your crisis management and to understand, finally, how America's most serious threats are actually addressed." Sarah returned the salute with the dignity of someone who'd earned every honor accorded to her through sacrifice most people couldn't comprehend. But her expression also carried the quiet satisfaction of someone whose most important achievements would never be publicly acknowledged, whose greatest victories would remain classified, whose service was measured not in recognition received, but in catastrophes prevented. 6 hours after the North Korean crisis reached its peak, USS Helena completed her patrol mission and departed the Yellow Sea under escort from Pacific Fleet assets that had materialized from positions North Korean intelligence had never detected. The submarine's crew would receive commendations for their performance under crisis conditions, though the true nature of what had occurred would remain classified at levels that protected operational methods and personnel whose intervention had prevented nuclear confrontation. In the Coronado skiff, Sarah was completing after-action reports that would be distributed to officials whose clearances granted them access to information about capabilities most government personnel never knew existed. The successful resolution of the crisis would be studied by crisis management specialists, but the true scope of operations would remain hidden even from congressional oversight committees. "Rear Admiral Mitchell," Admiral Morrison said, as the immediate crisis coordination concluded, "I need to understand the broader implications of what we've just witnessed. If Ghost Commander capabilities include the assets and authorities you've demonstrated today, How many other crises have been resolved through similar methods? Sarah's response painted a picture of national security operations that redefined civilian understanding of how America actually defended itself against the most serious threats it faced. Admiral Morrison. Defense Intelligence Agency Special Access Programs coordinate an average of 43 crisis interventions per year, ranging from terrorist plot interdiction to nuclear proliferation prevention to cyber warfare defense. She accessed summary reports that showed the scope of operations most Americans never knew protected them: economic warfare prevention, infrastructure protection, counterintelligence operations that neutralize hostile penetration of sensitive facilities, diplomatic crisis prevention that stops international conflicts before they escalate to military confrontation. Morrison studied the classified summaries with growing recognition of how much national security activity occurred beyond public awareness or conventional military oversight. How many one-day personnel are involved in these operations? Approximately 800 active personnel with Ghost Commander-level authorities, Sarah replied, supported by roughly 12,000 technical specialists, intelligence analysts, and operational support personnel whose existence is classified for their protection. The numbers represented a parallel military structure that existed alongside conventional forces, designed to address threats that couldn't be handled through normal diplomatic or military channels. Personnel whose identities were protected not just for operational security, but because their effectiveness depended on remaining invisible to enemies who would target them for elimination. Captain Hayes approached Sarah's position with the respectful demeanor of someone who finally understood why certain operations required personnel with authorities that transcended conventional military hierarchy. "Ma'am, the communication systems and coordination capabilities you accessed today, will they remain available for future crisis management?" Captain Hayes, your performance today demonstrated exceptional competence under conditions that tested your adaptability and professionalism, Sarah said, acknowledging Hayes's contribution while addressing her question. Selected personnel who've proven their reliability during crisis situations are often granted enhanced clearances that provide access to capabilities they've demonstrated they can handle responsibly. Hayes understood the implication immediately. Her participation in successful crisis resolution had qualified her for consideration for clearances that would grant access to the parallel military structure that actually handled America's most serious national security challenges. Chief Martinez, Sarah continued, addressing the senior communications technician whose technical skills had enabled coordination of operations at the highest classification levels, your expertise with classified communication systems suggests you might be interested in assignments that utilize those capabilities more extensively. Martinez's response was immediate and eager. "Ma'am, if there are opportunities to serve in positions that contribute to national security at the levels we've witnessed today, I would be honored to be considered." Sarah nodded approvingly. Crisis situations revealed personnel whose competence and character qualified them for responsibilities beyond their current positions. The successful resolution of the North Korean confrontation had identified several individuals whose potential warranted consideration for enhanced clearances and specialized assignments. Admiral Morrison was reviewing Sarah's service record with growing appreciation for achievements that represented military excellence at its highest levels. Rear Admiral Mitchell, your operational background and current responsibilities suggest experience with crisis management that extends well beyond today's situation. How many similar confrontations have you coordinated? Admiral Morrison, over the past 4 years in my current position, I've directed crisis response for 67 situations that required intervention beyond conventional diplomatic or military capabilities, Sarah replied, her tone carrying the matter-of-fact precision of someone whose achievements were measured in disasters prevented rather than recognition received. Nuclear terrorism prevention, biological weapons interdiction, cyber warfare that threatened critical infrastructure, economic warfare that could have triggered global financial collapse, terrorist operations that would have resulted in mass casualties, state-sponsored assassination attempts against American officials, and various forms of international provocation designed to force American strategic withdrawal from regions critical to national security. Morrison was quiet for several seconds, processing implications that redefined his understanding of how seriously America's national security was actually threatened on a routine basis. 67 crises in 4 years. That's more than one per month. Yes, Admiral. The threats facing American interests have increased in frequency and sophistication as hostile nations and non-state actors have developed capabilities that challenge conventional defense methods, Sarah said, which is why certain positions require personnel with authorities and capabilities that exist beyond normal military structure. The conversation was interrupted by Sarah's encrypted phone, which displayed an incoming message from sources that required immediate attention. She read the text quickly, her expression showing recognition that her successful resolution of the North Korean crisis had generated new opportunities for service at levels that demanded everything she could provide. Admiral Morrison, I'm receiving priority tasking for a developing situation that requires Ghost Commander intervention, Sarah said, gathering her materials with the efficiency of someone accustomed to rapid deployment for missions that couldn't be delayed. Thank you for your coordination during today's crisis. Your professionalism enabled successful resolution of a situation that could have escalated beyond control. Morrison stood and rendered a final salute as Sarah prepared to depart for whatever crisis demanded her attention. Next. Rear Admiral Mitchell. It's been an honor to witness your capabilities and to understand, finally, how America's most serious challenges are actually addressed. Good luck with your next mission. As Sarah walked toward the skiff exit, she paused to address the personnel who'd witnessed the implementation of capabilities most military members never encountered throughout entire careers of classified service. Ladies and gentlemen, what occurred here today will remain classified at levels that protect operational methods and personnel whose effectiveness depends on remaining invisible, she said, her voice carrying authority that made everyone understand their responsibilities regarding information they'd been privileged to witness. But remember that your professionalism under crisis conditions demonstrated why America's national security depends on individuals who perform their duties with excellence, regardless of whether their contributions are ever publicly acknowledged. She moved toward the door, then turned back with a final thought that would define how everyone present understood their service and its larger meaning. The most important victories are the ones that never make headlines, prevented by people whose names will never appear in history books, working in conditions where recognition matters less than results. Today, you were part of that tradition. Thank you for your service. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded like honor in the silence she left behind. 3 hours later, a nondescript sedan pulled away from Naval Base Coronado, carrying someone whose identity was classified for her protection, whose achievements would never be publicly acknowledged, and whose next mission would prevent a catastrophe that most Americans would never know threatened them. Ghost Commander was returning to the shadows, where legends operated beyond recognition, protecting freedoms that most citizens took for granted, serving in ways that officially didn't exist, but made everything else possible. The dining facility where Lieutenant Commander Morrison had attempted to humiliate a staff officer that morning now buzzed with whispered conversations about events that couldn't be discussed but couldn't be forgotten. Personnel who'd witnessed Sarah's revelation would never speak publicly about what they'd learned, but they'd never forget the lesson about quiet heroism hiding in plain sight. And somewhere in the Pacific, USS Helena's crew continued their patrol, protected by capabilities they didn't know existed, coordinated by someone whose service transcended conventional understanding of military excellence, guaranteed safe passage by a ghost commander who stood watch in darkness so others could live in light. The war room had gone silent when she revealed her call sign. But the truest silence was the one she carried into whatever came next, the silence of service without recognition, of sacrifice without fanfare, of duty that asked for everything and promised nothing except the knowledge that somewhere in the world, people slept safely because someone like Ghost Commander stood watch in the shadows. This story's end here, but the journey continue. Many new adventures are waiting for you. And if you enjoy, please take a moment to like, subscribe to our Military and Veteran Stories channel, and turn on the bell. See you in the next story. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.